She cleaned their floors and served their drinks. A quiet black maid they never bothered to learn the name of. At the reading of the will, they laughed in her face, mocked her presence, and whispered cruel jokes about her smelling like bleach. But what they didn't know was that she was more than just the maid. She was the owner's most trusted confidant and sole heir. When the lawyer reads the will, jaws will drop, egos will crumble, and everything will belong to the woman they humiliated. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. Now back to the drama. The grand, oak-paneled study of the Prescott family estate was a room built to intimidate. Books that had never been opened stood like soldiers on the towering shelves, their leather spines silently judging the people gathered below. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, struggled to pierce the heavy velvet curtains, casting long, somber shadows across the Persian rug. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the scent of old wood, lemon polish, and a bitter anticipation that was almost suffocating. This was a room designed for power, a place where fortunes were decided, and today was no exception. The Prescott family, a clan stitched together by wealth and united by greed, was assembled for the reading of Mr. Ellis Prescott's last will and testament. They sat in high-backed chairs that seemed more like thrones, their faces a mixture of feigned grief and poorly concealed impatience. In the back corner of this opulent cage, almost swallowed by the shadows, stood Martha Jean King. She wore her faded blue cleaning uniform, the fabric softened by thousands of washes. Her hands, calloused from decades of labor, were clasped loosely in front of her. Her head was slightly bowed, a posture of deference they had come to expect, to ignore, to depend upon. For 35 years she had been a fixture in this house, as much a part of the scenery as the grandfather clock in the hall or the crystal chandelier overhead. She was the ghost who polished the silver, the phantom who scrubbed the floors, the silent presence who served them their meals and cleared away their messes. She was Martha, the maid. To them that was all she was, and all she would ever be. Today, her presence in this room, during this sacred family ritual, was an anomaly, an irritation they couldn't comprehend. The family lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, a senior partner from a downtown firm, cleared his throat. He was an old friend of the deceased, and his face was etched with a weary sadness. He adjusted his spectacles and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice a low rumble, "to honor the final wishes of Mr. Ellis Prescott." Before he could continue, a sharp, ugly sound cut through the solemnity. It was a snort, loud and dismissive. All eyes turned to Lindsay Cartwright Prescott, the eldest granddaughter. She was perched on the edge of her chair, a vision in a designer black dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. A contemptuous smirk played on her lips. She gestured with a flick of her wrist toward the back of the room, her eyes locking onto Martha. "I'm sorry, Miss Henderson," Lindsay said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "But before we begin, can someone please explain why she is even here?" The question hung in the air for a moment, a poison dart finding its target. Then, the room erupted. It wasn't a gentle chuckle. It was a wave of cruel, unrestrained laughter. The dam of decorum broke, and the family's true nature flooded the room. An uncle, a portly man with a red face, mumbled just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably thinks she's getting a mop." The comment sent a fresh ripple of snickers through the group. Another cousin, a young man with a slick, cruel smile, leaned over to his sister and whispered, "God, she smells like bleach and desperation. Can't they wait outside?" His sister giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Look at her shoes," another voice chimed in. "Worn right through. What could she possibly have to do with any of this?" Through it all, Martha said nothing. She did not flinch. She did not raise her head. Her expression remained placid, a calm, deep ocean beneath a raging storm. She simply stood, her feet planted firmly on the floor she had polished just that morning, and she watched. She saw the sneer on Lindsay's face, the casual cruelty in the uncle's eyes, the utter lack of humanity in their laughter. They thought their words were weapons, meant to wound and diminish her. They had no idea that to her they were just noise, the meaningless buzzing of insects. Miss Henderson tapped a pen on the thick leather-bound document before him, his brow furrowed in disapproval. "If I may continue," he said, his voice strained. He attempted to regain control, to steer the proceedings back to the matter at hand, but the disrespect, now unleashed, had a life of its own. It grew louder, bolder. One of the younger cousins, emboldened by the pack mentality, stood up. He grabbed a feather duster from a nearby stand, one Martha had used just hours ago. He strode theatrically toward her, holding the duster aloft like a sword. "I dub thee, Sir Martha, Knight of the Scrubbing Bucket," he declared with a flourish. He swung the duster, and in his clumsy performance, he nearly knocked over a priceless Ming vase perched on a pedestal. It wobbled precariously. For a split second, the family gasped, their concern momentarily shifting to the inanimate object. The vase settled. The cousin, embarrassed but unwilling to back down, simply placed the feather duster back and slinked to his seat, amidst a few more stifled laughs. Martha hadn't moved a muscle. Her stillness was unnerving. She stood there, a silent, solitary pillar of dignity in a room full of crumbling character, and she watched. She saw everything. "The lawyer," Mr. Henderson sighed, a deep, weary sound that spoke of his long association with this family and their predictable failings. He continued reading from the will, his voice a monotonous drone, reciting the generic legal phrasing that opened such documents. "I, Alice Prescott, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The words washed over the room, but no one was truly listening to the preamble. Their minds were already counting the money, dividing the assets, claiming their inheritance, and their eyes, full of scorn, kept drifting back to the woman in the corner. As the legalese filled the air, Martha's mind drifted back, not in sadness, but in clarity. 35 years. A lifetime. She had arrived at this estate as a young woman of 23, a widow with a quiet resilience, forged in hardship. She had started in the kitchen, then moved to housekeeping, her diligence and integrity setting her apart. She hadn't just cleaned the Prescott house, she had become its silent, beating heart. Flashbacks played in her mind, not as faded memories, but as sharp, vivid scenes. She remembered a 5-year-old Lindsay, crying after falling off her bike, and how she had been the one to clean the scraped knee and offer a comforting hug, while Lindsay's mother was busy on a phone call about a charity gala. She remembered nursing Mr. Prescott through 3 debilitating strokes, long after his own children had made their token visits and rushed back to their own busy lives. She was the one who sat by his bedside through the long, quiet nights, the one who spoon-fed him when he couldn't hold a utensil, the one who listened to his fears when the world had stopped listening. She had cleaned every inch of this house, from the crystal prisms of the chandeliers to the dark, forgotten corners of the wine cellar. She knew its secrets. She knew where the floorboards creaked. She knew which windows rattled in the wind. She knew the history of every stain and every scratch. But the people in this room, the family she had served for over 3 decades, they didn't know her at all. They had never once asked about her life, her family, her dreams. To them, she was an object, a function, a pair of hands, just the maid. A whisper pulled her back to the present. It was one of the cousins, leaning toward his wife. "I bet she's hoping for scraps," he sneered, his words a foul puff of air. Maybe the old man left her his collection of old slippers. His wife let out a cruel, silent laugh, her shoulders shaking. Another family member chimed in from across the room, his voice a stage whisper meant for all to hear. "She probably thinks she's family after all this time. How pathetic." The words were meant to sting, to reinforce the chasm between their world and hers. They saw her presence as a pathetic, desperate grasp for a handout. The thought that she might be there for any other reason was simply beyond their comprehension. Their universe was small and walled in by money, and in it, people like Martha were merely part of the scenery. The tension in the room peaked in a moment of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Lindsay, bored with the lawyer's droning, leaned back in her chair. She looked directly at Martha, her eyes cold and imperious. She didn't call her name. She didn't need to. Instead, she did something she had done 1,000 times before. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, like a whip crack in the silent room. It was a summons, a command to a servant. "Why don't you be useful and get us some tea?" Lindsay demanded, her voice flat and entitled. "The service around here has already gone downhill." For a moment, the room was still. Every eye was on Martha. This was the ultimate test of the hierarchy, the reassertion of dominance. What would the maid do? Would she obey, Would she protest? Martha's reaction was simple. She gave a single, slow nod. Her face betrayed no anger, no humiliation. It was a mask of serene calm. She turned and walked with a steady, unhurried pace out of the grand study and into the hallway. The family watched her go, a collective smirk of satisfaction on their faces. The natural order had been restored. The maid was fetching tea. Once in the quiet of the hallway, out of their sight, Martha did not turn toward the kitchen. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her uniform, the same pocket where she kept a small cloth for dusting. She pulled out a simple, inexpensive cell phone. Her fingers, though worn, moved with purpose across the screen. She found the contact she was looking for and pressed the call button. The name on the screen wasn't a family member or a friend. It was Travis Dale. As the phone began to ring, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Martha's lips. The tea could wait. The memory was as clear as yesterday. 1 year ago, Mr. Ellis Prescott, the patriarch, the titan of industry, was a shadow of his former self. He was confined to his bed, his once powerful body frail and failing, a prisoner in the very mansion his ambition had built. But his mind, the mind that had forged a southern food conglomerate from a single roadside diner, was as sharp as ever. He sat propped up against a mountain of pillows, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow on his tired face. Beside him, in a simple wooden chair, sat Martha. They weren't master and servant in this room. They were equals. The pretense fell away the moment the door was closed. They talked for hours, as they often did. He didn't speak to her of household chores or cleaning schedules. He spoke to her about the stock market, about his competitors, about the legacy he had built, and the vultures who were circling it. "They only visit for the money, Martha," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Every single one of them. They walk in here, they look at me, but they don't see their father or their grandfather. They see a walking, talking bank vault. They're just waiting for the key." His eyes, though clouded with age, held a fiery clarity. He looked at Martha, and his gaze softened. "You're my only friend," he confessed, the words raw and true. "The only one who's ever been honest with me." This was the secret he kept, the truth hidden behind the closed doors of the estate. Martha Jean King was far more than his maid. For decades she had been his silent partner, his most trusted advisor. When he was just starting out, struggling to grow his business, it was Martha who had tasted his recipes and told him, with brutal honesty, which ones would sell. It was Martha who, after overhearing the complaints of other domestic workers, gave him the idea for a line of affordable, high-quality frozen family meals, an idea that became the cornerstone of his empire. She had no business degree, no formal training, but she had an unshakable common sense, a deep understanding of people, and an integrity that was as solid as granite. He had listened to her, quietly, behind the scenes, for over 30 years. When his beloved wife, Eleanor, passed away, his children had offered their rehearsed condolences, and then left him to his grief. It was Martha who had sat with him through the night, not speaking, just being present, a steady anchor in his storm of sorrow. She held his hand as he wept, her quiet strength a balm to his shattered heart. In private, when no one else was around, he didn't call her Martha, he called her his North Star. "You always point me true, Martha Jean," he would say. All. On that sunny afternoon a year ago he had revealed his final, most important secret. He gestured to a thick envelope on his bedside table. "That's it," he said. "The final version. My last will and testament." He pushed it toward her. "Open it." Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. She read the document, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Her breath hitched. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of shock and profound sadness. "Mr. Ellis," she whispered, "you can't. This is everything." "It is," he confirmed, a fierce satisfaction in his voice. "They think they own me. They think this house, this company, this money is their birthright. They've done nothing to earn it. They've done nothing but take. They treat people like dirt. They treated their own mother with impatience. They treat you like you're invisible." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But everything I built, it's going to the only one who ever gave me a moment of real, honest-to-God dignity. It's going to you, Martha Jean." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the humility that made her want to refuse. "Don't you dare argue with me," he commanded, a flash of the old CEO in his eyes. This isn't a gift. It's a responsibility. You have the wisdom to manage it. You have the character to deserve it. I'm not giving you a fortune, Martha. I'm giving you a tool to protect my legacy from the people who would squander it on vanity and foolishness. A tool to do some good in this world. He sank back into the pillows, his energy spent. Promise me, he whispered. Promise me you'll see it through. Martha looked at the will in her hands, then at the face of the only true friend she had in this house. She thought of the years of quiet disrespect, of being treated like furniture, and she thought of this man, who saw her when no one else did. I promise, Ellis, she said, her voice steady and clear. I promise. The phone call ended. Martha put her phone back in her pocket and took a deep, calming breath. She walked down the long hallway, her footsteps silent on the plush runner, and stopped at a small, unassuming door near the back of the house. It was a small office, more of a glorified closet, that had been assigned to the junior legal team. She knocked softly and entered. Inside, Travis Dale was pacing. He was a young lawyer, barely out of law school, with a nervous energy that made his suit seem a size too big. His desk was a chaotic landscape of files and legal pads. He stopped pacing when Martha entered, his eyes wide with anxiety. Miss King, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I was just reviewing the documents again. He gestured to the will lying on his desk. The same one Miss Henderson was reading in the study. They won't take this well, Travis said, stating the obvious. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. They'll fight it. They'll call you every name in the book. They'll drag you through the mud. Martha's face was a mask of tranquility. She looked at the young man, at his fear and his fundamental decency, and she felt a sense of calm settle over her. Justice rarely lands soft, Travis, she replied, her voice low and even. It often makes a loud, uncomfortable noise when it arrives. Travis had seen it. He had been assigned to the Prescott estate for the past 6 months, organizing Mr. Prescott's personal papers. He had been a fly on the wall, and he had seen the way the family treated Martha. He saw the dismissive waves of the hand, heard the condescending tone, witnessed the casual cruelty of people who believed their wealth made them superior. He had seen Lindsay snap her fingers at Martha over a misplaced magazine. He had heard the uncle complain about the quality of the help when Martha was sand just a few feet away. It had sickened him. He had also been the one to notarize Mr. Prescott's signature on the final will. He had been in the room when the old man, with a clear and resolute voice, had explained his decision. He had seen the deep, abiding respect Mr. Prescott had for this quiet, humble woman. He looked from the will to Martha's calm, determined face. He was a junior lawyer. Defying the powerful Prescott family could be career suicide. But siding with them, helping them subvert the dying wishes of a man he respected, felt like a betrayal of everything he was supposed to stand for. He made his decision. I'll do it, he said, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence. We'll stick to the original will, exactly as Mr. Prescott wrote it, no matter what pushback comes. A small, appreciative nod from Martha was his reward. She knew the risk he was taking. She knew the pressure he would face from his own firm, from the family, from the world. I need you to be strong, Travis, she warned him, her gaze intense. Once this drops, you'll see who they really are. Their masks will come off. It will be ugly. He swallowed hard but held her gaze. He thought of his own grandmother, a woman who had worked hard her entire life and had always taught him to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. Let's do this, he said, a new resolve hardening his voice. It's time. Martha nodded again, then turned and left the small office, closing the door softly behind her. As she walked back toward the grand study, the sound of Lindsay's voice drifted down the hall. She was no longer whispering. She was bragging, her voice full of triumphant glee. The first thing I'm doing is tearing out that ghastly rose garden. I'm thinking a new pool house, something with a Mediterranean vibe, and a whole new wing for my wardrobe. Of course, my interior designer is already on standby. Martha paused for a moment, listening to the casual arrogance, the greedy plans being laid for a future that would never come. She took another deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to re-enter the storm. When Martha stepped back into the study, the atmosphere had shifted. The initial wave of mockery had subsided into a low simmer of greedy anticipation. Mr. Henderson was still reading, but no one was paying attention to the legal jargon. They were waiting for the good part, The numbers. The distribution of the spoils. Before the lawyer could get to the heart of the matter, Lindsay Prescott stood up. She was holding a crystal glass of water, which she raised as if it were the finest champagne. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to her. She was the family's self-appointed monarch, and she was about to hold court. "I think a toast is in order," she announced, a brilliant, predatory smile on her face. She surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over her relatives, her allies in avarice. She intentionally let her eyes linger on Martha for a moment, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "A toast," she continued, her voice ringing with false sentiment, "to family, to fortune, and to finally getting rid of the old man's." She laughed, a short, sharp sound, and glanced pointedly at Martha again. The insult was unmistakable, a public declaration that Martha was no more than a stray animal the old man had kept around, an inconvenience that would now be discarded. The room, eager to curry favor with the presumptive new head of the family, chuckled along with her. Their laughter was a chorus of sycophants, each one reinforcing the casual cruelty. Travis Dale, who had followed Martha back into the room and now stood near the lawyer's desk, shot a nervous glance in her direction. He saw the insult land. He saw the collective smear of the family. He braced himself for her reaction, expecting a flicker of pain, a hint of anger, a tightening of her jaw. He saw nothing. Martha remained perfectly, unnervingly stone-faced. Her composure was a fortress. The insults were like arrows bouncing harmlessly off its granite walls. She just stood there, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. Her stillness seemed to infuriate Lindsay even more. It was as if her best weapons were useless. One of the cousins, the same one who had brandished the feather duster, decided to pile on. "I was thinking," he said loudly, winking at Lindsay. "We could build a new swimming pool right where the maid's room used to be. It would get the best afternoon sun." The comment drew more appreciative laughter. They were already erasing her, paving over her 35 years of service with their frivolous desires. Lindsay soaked it all in, her ego swelling with every sycophantic giggle. She raised her glass higher, bringing the grotesque performance to a close. A final, triumphant smirk spread across her face. "I simply can't wait," she said, her voice practically purring, "to see what Grandpa left me." She took a delicate sip of her water and sat back down, the Queen returning to her throne, confident that the world was about to be laid at her feet. The entire room was now buzzing with a frenzied energy. The moment was finally here. Mr. Henderson, the senior lawyer, looked up from the document, his face grim. He had witnessed the entire disgusting spectacle, and his expression was one of deep disappointment. He put on his glasses, his movements slow and deliberate, creating a pocket of silence in the buzzing room. He cleared his throat, and the sound seemed to command the attention of everyone present. "As I was saying," he began, his voice, now devoid of any warmth, carrying a new, sharp edge of authority. "This will is legally binding and final." Miss Prescott took great pains to ensure there would be no ambiguity. He looked directly at Lindsay, then let his gaze sweep over the rest of the greedy faces. "Let's proceed to the distribution of assets." A palpable thrill ran through the room. This was it. The family members leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes gleaming. Mr. Henderson began to read. "To my dear nephew Robert Prescott, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles." Robert, the portly uncle, beamed, nodding his head in satisfaction. "To my niece, Catherine Prescott, I leave my collection of antique jewelry, including the sapphire necklace that belonged to her grandmother." Catherine gasped theatrically, touching her neck. The family nodded along, their contentment growing with each bequest. These were the trinkets, the baubles they expected. They were generous, but they were just the appetizers before the main course. Then, Travis Dale, the junior lawyer, stepped forward. He took a separate, single sheet of paper from Mr. Henderson. All eyes shifted to him. Travis's hand was shaking slightly, but his voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly steady. "We now come to the primary assets," he announced. "These include the Prescott family estate, all stock holdings in Prescott Foods International, and the controlling shares of the company." The air in the room became electric. This was the kingdom. Lindsay sat up straighter, a smug, proprietary smile already forming on her lips. She could practically feel the weight of the empire settling onto her shoulders. Travis took a deep breath. He looked down at the page. He did not look at the family. He looked at Martha. Then he began to read the single devastating sentence that had been written by Mr. Ellis Prescott. All of it, Travis read, his voice clear and ringing in the sudden, absolute silence. The house, the land, the stocks, the company, and the entirety of my remaining financial estate goes to Martha Jean King. Dead silence. For 5 full, agonizing seconds, the room was frozen in time. It was as if the words had sucked all the oxygen out of the air. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the frantic, silent spinning of their minds, trying to process a statement that was so completely outside their reality that it simply did not compute. Then, the spell broke. A collective, audible gasp swept through the room. A sound of pure, unified shock. Someone, a cousin in the back, let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. Is this a joke?" he stammered, looking around for confirmation. "A prank?" Did the old man have a twisted sense of humor? A heavy crystal glass slipped from an uncle's numb fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the stunned quiet. But all eyes were on Lindsay. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving a pasty white mask of disbelief. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her perfect, smug world had just been obliterated by a single sentence. "This is a mistake," she finally shrieked, finding her voice. The words tore through the room, raw and ragged. "This is a clerical error. A typo. Read it again." He meant to leave her the furniture, not the fortune. She stood up, her body trembling with rage. She pointed a shaking finger at Travis. "You read it wrong." Travis remained calm, his youthful nervousness replaced by a surprising steeliness. He did not flinch under her furious gaze. "It's not a mistake, Miss Prescott," he replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "It is written here, very clearly, and there's more." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "There's video testimony, and signatures. Multiple witnesses." The family stared at him, their expressions shifting from shock to a dawning, sputtering rage. Video testimony? Witnesses? This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated act. Lindsay's face contorted into a mask of pure fury. "I don't believe you," she hissed. Show me this supposed testimony." She was convinced it was a bluff, a trick. Travis simply nodded to an assistant who had been waiting quietly by the wall. The assistant walked to a large television screen, which had been discreetly placed in the corner of the room, and pressed a button on a remote control. The screen flickered to life. The Prescott family's nightmare was just beginning. Travis didn't need to say another word. He simply hit play. The screen lit up, and the face of Mr. Ellis Prescott appeared, filling the room. He wasn't the frail, bedridden man they remembered from their last dutiful visits. In this video, filmed just 2 months before his passing, he was sitting upright in his favorite armchair, dressed in a sharp blazer. His eyes were clear, his voice strong and resonant, filled with an unshakable purpose. The family gasped. This was not a man who was confused or senile. This was the powerful, commanding patriarch they had always feared. "If you are watching this," Mr. Prescott began, his gaze seeming to pierce through the screen and look directly at each one of them, "it means I am gone, and it means my will has been read as I instructed." He paused, letting the weight of his presence settle over the silent, stunned room. "I know that many of you will be shocked by my decision. You will be angry. You will feel betrayed." He let out a short, mirthless laugh. "You will feel entitled to a fortune you did nothing to build, and everything to disrespect." He then began to speak about his family, not with love, but with a cold, brutal honesty. He named his children, his grandchildren, one by one. He recounted their greed, their selfishness, their endless requests for money, their complete and utter lack of compassion. "None of you came for me," he said, his voice laced with a profound, decades-long disappointment. "You came for what I had. You saw me as a means to an end. An obstacle to your inheritance." Then, his expression softened, his voice changed. He spoke of Martha. "But there was one person who was always there, one person who asked for nothing and gave everything, one person who sat with me, talked with me, and cared for me, not because of my money, but because of a fundamental decency that none of you possess. That person is Martha Jean King. As he spoke, the camera panned slightly, and there she was, sitting in a chair just out of frame. She looked calm, her hands resting in her lap. The Mr. Prescott on the screen turned to her, a look of deep affection and gratitude on his face. She was never just the maid, he declared, his voice booming with conviction. She was my confidant, my advisor, and my truest friend. My only true family. This company, this estate, it was built on a foundation of hard work and dignity. Martha is the only person I trust to carry that legacy forward. He turned back to the camera, his eyes like steel. Therefore, I leave everything I own to her. It is my final, unchangeable, and legally documented wish. She is the rightful heir. The video ended. The screen went black, but the silence it left behind was deafening. Martha stood in her corner, watching the screen, her face impassive. She was not gloating. She was simply bearing witness to the truth being told. The family, however, was speechless. Their faces were a gallery of horror and disbelief. Finally, Lindsay found her voice again, and it was a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. That old man was manipulated. She screamed, her face red and blotchy. She poisoned his mind. He was senile. This is elder abuse. She was grasping at straws, her mind scrambling for any explanation that didn't involve her own failings. Travis Dale stepped forward again, his demeanor cool and professional. On the contrary, Miss Prescott, he countered calmly. Miss Prescott was mentally evaluated by 3 separate, board-certified psychiatrists in the month before this video was filmed. All 3 evaluations concluded that he was of exceptionally sound mind and fully competent to make his own legal and financial decisions. This will stand. The dam of Prescott's civility, already cracked, shattered completely. Lindsay, her eyes wild with a fury that bordered on madness, stormed toward Martha. She closed the distance between them in a few short strides, her fists clenched, her face contorted in a snarl. "You," she spat, her voice a venomous hiss. "You don't deserve this. You are nothing. You're just a cleaning lady." She was right in Martha's face now, her expensive perfume warring with the scent of bleach that clung faintly to Martha's uniform. She expected Martha to cower, to shrink back, to be intimidated. She expected tears. She expected fear. She got none of it. Martha stood her ground. For the first time that day, she lifted her head and looked Lindsay directly in the eye. Her gaze was not angry. It was not hateful. It was something far more devastating. It was dismissive. A deep, profound calm emanated from her, the kind of calm that comes from knowing a truth so powerful that no amount of screaming can touch it. "And you," Martha replied, her voice soft, quiet, but carrying the weight of an anvil, "are just noise, baby." The 2 words, just noise, hit Lindsay with the force of a physical blow. They stripped her of her power, her status, her rage. They rendered her completely and utterly insignificant. The room, which had been frozen, erupted into chaos. Lindsay let out an incoherent scream of frustration and lunged at Martha, her manicured nails reaching for Martha's face. But she never made it. 2 of her uncles, jolted into action, grabbed her by the arms and held her back. She struggled against them, a whirlwind of impotent fury. "We'll sue you," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "We'll sue you into the ground. You'll never see a penny of this money. This family will crush you." That was when Travis Dale delivered the final, crushing blow. He stepped forward, holding up a hand to silence the room. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the din, "that might be difficult." He looked at the packet of documents in his hand. Mr. Prescott included a final provision. In the event of any legal contest to this will from any member of his family, he left explicit instructions to freeze all family trust accounts, effective immediately, pending a full review. As he spoke those words, a sound began to fill the room. It was the buzzing and chiming of cell phones. One by one, the family members pulled out their devices. Their angry, shocked faces turned to looks of pure panic. A cousin's eyes went wide. He dropped his phone onto the carpeted floor. He froze us," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My account. It's inaccessible. A wave of frantic tapping on screens confirmed the reality. They were cut off. The source of their power, their arrogance, their entire identity, had been severed with a single clause in a will. Their trust funds, their allowances, their endless lines of credit all gone. In that moment, they were no longer the powerful Prescott clan. They were just a room full of people with suddenly empty bank accounts. Martha looked at the scene of their complete and utter meltdown. She saw the panic, the fear, the dawning horror in their eyes. She had seen enough. With a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the entire room, she turned and walked past them, her worn shoes making no sound on the expensive rug. As she reached the doorway, she paused without turning around. "I'll have my assistant," she said, the words dropping into the stunned silence. "Send you the paperwork regarding your eviction from this property." Then she walked out, leaving the noise behind her. The next morning, the sun rose over the Prescott estate, but it was the dawn of a new era. The air in the mansion, usually heavy with the ghosts of entitlement, felt lighter, clearer. At precisely 9 a.m., the entire household staff was assembled in the grand dining room. They stood in a nervous line, a mix of cooks, gardeners, drivers and housekeepers. They whispered amongst themselves, their faces etched with uncertainty. They had all heard the rumors, the fragmented stories of the explosive will reading. They didn't know what to believe. They were afraid for their jobs, for their futures. The doors to the dining room swung open, and Martha Jean King walked in. But it was not the Martha they knew. The faded blue uniform was gone. In its place, she wore a crisp, impeccably tailored black pantsuit. Her hair was elegantly styled, and she wore a simple pearl necklace. She carried a leather portfolio under her arm. She was no longer Martha the maid. She was the owner of the house, and she moved with a quiet, unshakable authority that commanded instant respect. A hush fell over the room. The staff stared, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Martha walked to the head of the long, polished mahogany table. A table she had dusted and polished thousands of times, and placed her portfolio down. She surveyed the faces before her, her gaze moving from one person to the next. She knew them all. She knew their families, their struggles, their strengths. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and clear, resonating in the cavernous room. "I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. The rumors you have heard are true. As of yesterday afternoon, I am the new owner of this estate, and the acting CEO of Prescott Foods International." A collective, quiet gasp went through the staff. It was one thing to hear a rumor. It was another to have it confirmed so directly. Martha let the news sink in for a moment before continuing. "I have worked alongside all of you for many years," she said, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "I know the hard work and dedication you bring to this home. I want to thank you for your service." She then opened her portfolio, "And because I know your work, I know who has earned more responsibility." She looked at Maria, the head cook. "Maria, you've been running the kitchen for 20 years. I'm promoting you to estate manager. You will oversee the entire household." Maria's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears of shock and gratitude. Martha then promoted a longtime gardener to head of groundskeeping and one of the junior housekeepers, a bright and diligent young woman, to head of housekeeping. Then, her expression hardened slightly. Her gaze settled on a footman named Arthur, a man known for his gossiping and his cruel jokes at the expense of others. Arthur shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes. "Arthur," Martha said, her voice losing its warmth. "Yesterday, in the kitchen, you told the driver that I was a charity case, and that you hoped I wouldn't get my dirty hands on the real money." The color drained from Arthur's face. He had thought no one of importance was listening. He had forgotten that Martha was always there, silent, in the background. "You thought I didn't hear you," Martha said, her voice low and steady. "You thought I didn't matter. But I heard you, and I never forget disrespect." She looked him directly in the eye. "Your services are no longer required. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings and vacate the premises." Arthur stood frozen, his mouth agape. The rest of the staff was stunned into silence. The message was clear. Loyalty and respect would be rewarded. Disrespect would not be tolerated. Martha closed her portfolio. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Effective, immediately," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "This is how things will be run. We will operate this house and this company with dignity. We will treat everyone, from the boardroom to the mailroom, with respect. We will be making changes, big changes. Now, let's get to work." The story of the maid who inherited $1 billion fortune was too sensational to remain a secret. Within days, it had exploded from a local curiosity into a national media firestorm. News vans were parked outside the gates of the Prescott estate. Reporters shouted questions every time the gates opened. The internet was ablaze with speculation, opinions, and hot takes. Hashtags like "Maid Millionaire" and "Justice for Martha" trended for days. Martha Jean King was suddenly one of the most famous women in America. She could have hidden. She could have released a sterile press release through a high-priced PR firm. But that was not her way. Instead, she did something bold. She called a press conference. She decided to face the world, not as an heiress, but as a leader. She stood at a podium set up on the manicured front lawn of the estate, the grand mansion forming a stunning backdrop. She was the picture of composure in a simple but elegant navy blue dress. The world's media was gathered before her, a sea of cameras, microphones, and skeptical faces. They were expecting a fairy tale princess or a lottery winner, someone overwhelmed and out of her depth. They were not prepared for the woman who stood before them. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady, carrying easily over the clicking of the cameras. "My name is Martha Jean King." She didn't flinch from the blinding flashes of the cameras. She looked out at the crowd with the same calm she had shown the Prescott family. "I know my story is an unusual one," she continued, "and I know many of you are here to find out how a maid could find herself in this position. The truth is simple. I was a friend to a man who valued loyalty and integrity above all else. Mr. Ellis Prescott was not just my employer, he was my mentor and my dear friend. He entrusted me not with a fortune, but with a legacy." She spoke about her plans for the company, not in vague platitudes, but with a clear, decisive vision. She announced the formation of a new charitable foundation, funded by a significant portion of the estate, dedicated to providing educational scholarships and support for domestic workers. She outlined a new employee profit-sharing program for Prescott Foods, ensuring that the people who worked for the company would share in its success. The reporters were stunned. They had come for gossip and drama. They were getting a masterclass in corporate leadership and social responsibility. A black maid, a woman they had already stereotyped and dismissed, was becoming the CEO of $1 billion company, and she was doing it with more grace and vision than most Ivy League graduates. During the question and answer session, one reporter, a man from a cynical cable news network, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. He spoke into his microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. "Miss King, all of this is very impressive, but at the end of the day, there are those who will always say, 'You were just the maid.' What do you say to those people?" A hush fell over the crowd. This was the moment of truth. How would she handle the label that her enemies were trying to use as a weapon? Martha looked at the reporter, and for the first time, a genuine, radiant smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure confidence, of complete self-acceptance. "I say they're right," she replied, her voice ringing with pride. "For 35 years I was the maid. I washed floors. I cleaned toilets. I served meals. I took pride in my work. And I did it with dignity." She leaned into the microphone, her smile unwavering. "I was the maid," she repeated, her voice clear and strong, "and I owned every single second of it." The power of her answer silenced the entire press corps. In that single powerful statement, she had taken their label, their insult, and transformed it into a badge of honor. The story was no longer just about the money. It was about dignity, hard work, and the quiet power of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. While Martha was reshaping a corporate empire, the Prescott family was experiencing the dizzying, terrifying freefall of a dynasty collapsing. Their attempts to fight back were futile. The legal documents prepared by Mr. Prescott and Travis Dale were, as one of their own high-priced lawyers described it, a fortress of iron. The will was airtight. The psychiatric evaluations were indisputable. The video testimony was devastating. Every legal challenge they mounted was swiftly and decisively struck down. They were left with nothing but the rapidly dwindling funds in their personal checking accounts. The trust funds were frozen solid, The mansion was no longer their home. The company was no longer their birthright. Their power had vanished overnight. Lindsay, unable to accept her new reality, embarked on a desperate, ill-advised media tour. She painted herself as the victim, a grieving granddaughter robbed of her legacy by a manipulative, gold-digging servant. She went on talk shows, her face a mask of practiced sorrow, and spun a tale of a poor, confused old man being taken advantage of. She preyed on his loneliness. Lindsay cried to one sympathetic host. She isolated him from his family, who loved him dearly. For a brief moment, she managed to stir up a small pocket of public sympathy, but the sympathy vanished in an instant. Her media tour had made her a public figure, and in the digital age, the past is never truly buried. A former housekeeper at the Prescott estate, one who had been fired by Lindsay for being too slow, came forward. She provided a news blog with a cell phone video she had taken a year prior. The video showed Lindsay in the mansion's kitchen, screaming at a delivery driver because his truck had left a small smudge of dirt on the driveway. The footage was ugly. Lindsay's face was contorted with rage, her voice dripping with venom, as she belittled the working-class man. But that wasn't the worst of it. Another video soon surfaced, this one taken by a caterer at a lavish party Lindsay had thrown. It showed her openly mocking a member of the catering staff, mimicking her accent and laughing with her friend. The caption on the social media post read, "This is the grieving granddaughter who loved her family." Public opinion turned on a dime. The narrative flipped from wronged heiress to entitled bully. The hashtag #CancelLindsayPrescott began trending. Her carefully curated influencer brand, built on a foundation of fake smiles and sponsored posts, crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. Sponsors, terrified of being associated with her toxicity, dropped her in droves. Her social media comment sections became a raging torrent of public condemnation. The final humiliation came a week later. Following the legal notices sent by Martha's new legal team, the eviction process began. Lindsay was forced to pack her belongings and leave the estate she had always considered her own. She stood on the curb, surrounded by designer luggage, as a moving truck hauled away her possessions. She watched as the locks on the grand iron gates were changed. A local news crew, tipped off by a neighbor, was there to capture the moment. "They kicked me out of my own house," she screamed at the camera, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down her face. A neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived next to the estate for 50 years and had witnessed the family's arrogance firsthand, was walking her dog. She overheard Lindsay's shriek. The woman paused, looked Lindsay up and down, and delivered the final, simple truth. "It was never your house, dear," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "It was always his." Then she walked away, leaving Lindsay alone on the sidewalk, with the ruins of her life. A few weeks after the dust had settled, Travis Dale received a call. It was from Martha King's new executive assistant, requesting his presence at the mansion. He arrived, his heart pounding with a familiar nervousness. He had done his job, but he was still a junior lawyer from a downtown firm. He half expected to be thanked, given a modest bonus, and sent on his way. He was shown not to a small back office, but to the grand, oak-paneled study, the very room where the will had been read. The room looked different now. The heavy, oppressive curtains had been pulled back, and the room was flooded with bright, natural light. The air felt clean, hopeful. Martha was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk, not perched on it like a guest, but sitting with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. She was reviewing a stack of documents, and she looked up and smiled as Travis entered. "Travis," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Please, sit down." He sat in one of the plush leather chairs opposite her, the same kind of chair the Prescott family had occupied. It felt strange. "I wanted to see you in person," Martha began, setting aside her papers and giving him her full attention. "I wanted to thank you. You were put in a very difficult position. You could have chosen the easy path. You could have sided with them, but you didn't." "I was just doing my job, Miss King," Travis said, his voice humble. "I was honoring Mr. Prescott's wishes." "You did more than that," Martha corrected him gently. "You showed integrity when it was tested. You kept your word when it would have been profitable not to. That isn't just doing your job. That's character." She looked at him, her gaze thoughtful and appraising. Mr. Prescott valued character above all else. And so do I. She slid a thick blue folder across the polished surface of the desk. It stopped directly in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "That," Martha said, a small, proud smile on her face, "is your new employment contract. I am dissolving my relationship with your old firm. I'm building my own in-house legal team, and I want you to run it. You're my new legal director." Travis stared at her, then at the folder, then back at her. He was speechless. Legal director of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It was a position that seasoned lawyers with decades of experience vied for. He couldn't process it. But I'm just a junior associate," he stammered, the words tumbling out. "I'm not qualified. I don't have the experience." Martha held up a hand, gently interrupting his flood of self-doubt. "You have the one qualification that matters most to me," she said, her voice firm and certain. "You're loyal, Travis. In my world, that's worth more than any title on a resume. It's worth more than a degree from the fanciest law school." She pushed the folder a little closer to him. "The salary is in there. The benefits are in there. But the real offer is the chance to be part of something new. Something built on a foundation of respect. The choice is yours." Travis looked at Martha's face, at the unwavering belief in her eyes. He thought of his life, his career, the kind of man he wanted to be. He opened the folder, then he looked up at her, a new confidence dawning in his own eyes. He was no longer just a nervous junior lawyer. He was a man who had been seen, valued, and rewarded for his integrity. "I accept," he said, his voice clear and strong. In the quiet evenings, long after the staff had gone home and the phone calls had stopped, Martha would walk through the grand, silent halls of the mansion. The air felt different now. It was no longer a place of service and subjugation for her. It was a place of stewardship, of responsibility. The echoes of the Prescott's arrogance were fading, replaced by a sense of peace and purpose. She would stand in the oak-paneled study and look out the large window at the sprawling gardens below, the gardens she now owned. She didn't feel a sense of triumph or victory. She felt a profound sense of duty. One afternoon, she drove herself, not in a chauffeured limousine, but in a simple, modest sedan, to the cemetery where Mr. Ellis Prescott was buried. She placed a small bouquet of fresh-cut roses, from the very garden Lindsay had wanted to destroy, on his grave. The marble headstone was simple, elegant, bearing his name and the dates of his life. She stood there for a long time, the wind gently rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that shaded the grounds. "I kept my promise, Ellis," she whispered to the quiet stone. "I'm doing my best to honor your legacy, with dignity." She felt a sense of peace, of a circle being completed. Her work was just beginning, but the foundation was set. That evening, she did not stay in the massive master suite of the mansion. Instead, she drove back across town to her own modest apartment, the small, clean, two-bedroom unit she had called home for the past 20 years. It was a place filled not with priceless antiques, but with memories, with photographs of her late husband and her distant relatives. It was her sanctuary, her anchor. She watered her plants, cooked a simple meal for herself, and sat on her comfortable, well-worn sofa. The world now saw her as a billionaire CEO, a titan of industry, a symbol of dramatic change. But in the quiet of her own home, she was still Martha Jean King, humble, grounded, unchanged by the fortune that had been thrust upon her. She knew that the mansion, the company, the money, they were all just tools. They were not the measure of her worth. Her worth came from somewhere deeper, from the integrity and strength of character that had been forged over a lifetime of quiet, dignified labor. Power doesn't change who you are. It simply reveals for all the world to see who you always were. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.